tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Sabba papa sa akaranang kusala supasampada sachitta pariyodapanang etam buddhana sasanante. Hello, welcome everyone to another Wednesday evening with the Clear Mountain Monastery community. This is Māgha Pūjā week. That is, it's the continuation of the week that Māgha Pūjā Day happened on, which is one of the three main Buddhist holidays in Theravada Buddhist countries. So Māgha is a month in the Indian lunar calendar, and it usually coincides with February. This year is a bit late. It was on Monday, March 6th, but it's a big day, so we might as well celebrate it for the whole week, if not the whole year, or at least the spirit of the day. The whole teaching, I spoke about it a little bit last week. It is, of the three Buddhist holidays, can be considered Sangha Day, with Visakha Puja being Buddha Day. That's when the Buddha, full moon in the month of May. And that's when the Buddha was born, and I believe 35 years later, when he was enlightened, and then when he was 80, when he passed away into Nibbāna, when he passed away. So that's Visakha Puja, and then Asalaha Puja, which happens just, I believe, a month or so later. Could be 2 months, but that's Dhamma Day. That's when the Buddha first gave the Dhammacakka Sutta, when the Buddha taught his first 5 disciples the turning of the wheel of Dharma, the first discourse in which Anya Kondanya became a stream enter. Today, we'll continue celebrating Māgha Pūjā, which is the occurrence when 1,250 Arhat disciples of the Buddha spontaneously gathered on the full moon of the month of Māgha without the Buddha having convened them. There was no emails, no Slack notifications, no discourse updates. They knew. Part of the tradition is that all of these 1,250 arhants had what's called the 4 abhinyas, or they had psychic powers, and somehow they were able to communicate that we're all going to get together on the full moon day of that year. And this was I think less than 6 months after the Buddha had attained enlightenment of the previous year. So that's the context. And in this gathering of 1,250 arhants, the Buddha gave a beautiful teaching, which we'll be going into in more detail tonight. And it's pretty straightforward. I'll be giving some context on this teaching, which is called the Ovāda-Pāṭimokkha, and just giving some more understanding of the different Pali terms contained therein. But then I'll open it up to questions, so people can put questions or comments in the thread, either on Facebook or on YouTube, and we'll get to comments. And I'd love to hear what people's thoughts are about this holiday, how they celebrate it, how you've celebrated, what your thoughts are about the content of the discourse that the Buddha gave. But before getting into all that, it's good to give some attention to the third line that I chanted at the beginning of this evening. So, Sachitta Pariyodapanang, this is the third line of the Ovāda-Pāṭimokkha, his teaching on that night, which is the purification of one's own mind. And the Buddha gave us many tools for doing this, and one of them is sitting. So the collected practice of giving attention to one's own mind. So let's just sit for maybe just 5 minutes to collect the mind. And when I say sit, that's just a posture of stability. It can be on the floor, can be in a chair, can be standing up, or if you've got some presence of mind, it can even be walking or lying down, just coming to a place of groundedness. And bring your attention to the heart space. So the area in between the lungs and the upper chest. And try not to just think about this spot, but see if you can actually know experience, become aware from this heart space. And in this meditation, you can pay attention to the breath if you want, but see if the mind can collect just around the spatial orientation of residing in this heart space, knowing the world from about knowing the world from someplace other than behind the eyes. And from this space, see if you can keep your awareness big enough to even not have to be at all aggressive with any thoughts that might pass through the mind. It's just the brain doing what a brain does. But knowing from the heart and keeping awareness expansive. Success in this type of meditation is just keeping the heart big, keeping awareness broad, and knowing from this locality within our chest. And I'll start going into the specifics of the discourse now, but please feel free and encouraged to stay with this. See how long you can maintain this awareness from somewhere other than our laser eyes, somewhere other than our usual headiness. So coming from a heart space and keeping awareness broad. You can listen, you can speak from this space and experiment with it. It's not a meditation object or a meditation subject, which is often taught, but it works for a lot of people. And for myself, it really brings home the heart meaning of the word chitta. So this sachitta pariyodapanang, the purification of one's heart, is what we're engaged with when we move attention down. And, it's not purification of the brain. It's not brainwashing. We're purifying the heart by knowing the world from the heart. So let's jump in. So this is the Ovāda-Pāṭimokkha. This is a name the Buddha didn't call the discourse this, but later generations gave it this name. Pāṭimokkha is it's the name for the monks' rules, the monks and the nuns' rules. So monks, we have 227 rules, and that's the bhikkhu, the monks' Pāṭimokkha. We recite this every 2 weeks. Mokkha means face or front or the forefront. Pati is that which is inclining towards, in this instance. So that which is at the forefront. The forefront of what? The forefront of sila, of morality. And an ovada is a teaching, an instruction, encouragement. So this is an encouragement which is like the monastic discipline. So as you'll remember, the context of this is that the Buddha gave it to a group of arhats. These are people who no longer have any greed, anger, or delusion. So what is this connection? Why is the Buddha preaching to people who've already, in the words of the suttas, done the task, completed what had to be done, and those who have no more further becoming? Why is the Buddha preaching to them about morality? So it's a good question just to look into. So these verses appear in at least 2 spots in the canon. They appear in a sutta in the Digha Nikaya, I believe the Mahapadana Sutta, perhaps, or the Mahasudassana. I'm not sure. In that sutta, it's actually in the context of a teaching from a previous Buddha. But where I'm more familiar with it from is from the Dhammapada. It's Dhammapada verses, 185, 86, 87, something like that. It's in the chapter on the Buddha. And it's 3 verses long. The first 2 verses have 4 lines or 4 padas or parts, and the last instance, the last of these 3 verses has 6. So this is the first verse. Sabba papa sa karanang kusala supasampada sachitta pariyodapanang etang buddhana sasanang. Not doing any evil, to be committed to the good, to purify one's mind. These are the teachings of the Buddhas. So this is the translation. It's one of the translations from the Amaravati chanting book. That's the chanting book that's used at Clear Mountain and at Amaravati, Abhayagiri. Pretty sure most of the branch monasteries in the Ajahn Chah tradition. And an interesting thing about those chanting books is that this is the only sutta, the only 3 verses, the only page or pages in those books that has 2 English translations of the same text. And I'm not totally sure about the history of why that is, but they're somewhat similar translations. So I chose not to include them here, but that fact that it's in there translated twice, points to the importance of this text. So what is this? Not doing any evil. So sabba papasa akaranang. This word evil always needs some unpacking. Or let's say the word papa needs some unpacking. It can be translated evil, but evil just has so much baggage with it in the English language. It has so many connotations and implications that just aren't there in the Pali. There's no original sin in Buddhism, and there's no external force which can absolutely corrupt you. So papa here, there are a couple meanings of it, aside from evil, that are a bit more thought-provoking, curiosity inclining. And that there's a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, which 42.7, I believe, uh, which uses it in the context of just farmland, which is barren or bad soil. So soil which has a lot of salt or is arid is papa bhumi. Bhumi is soil or ground, earth, which is papa, which is here barren or just it's not so good soil. It's not soil which is going to produce the kind of fruits and plants and vegetation that any farmer wants. And I think that's a lot healthier than any of the moral or the English tainted words like evil or sinful or vile or wicked or other translations that you see. And it is a strong word. You do have this word akusala, which is unskillful, and papa is a bit stronger than that. In fact, the word papima, I believe, is a epithet, another name for Mara, the kind of bad guy of the Pali Canon. So that's some history of papa. So not doing that, and not doing that in every form that takes. So not killing, not stealing, not lying, not thinking in ways that are papa. So thinking in ways which are greedy or hateful or contain some kind of wrong view. So to be committed to the good, kusala supasampada. So kusala, that's the opposite of akusala, which I just mentioned. And it has an interesting etymology. So it can be translated as wholesome, or as it is here, good, or skillful. And the word itself, people might be familiar with kusa grass. I believe that might even be the English name for it. But it's basically a type of long grass that grows in India, which has very sharp edges. And if you're not careful, if you're trying to cut kusa grass, which it was used in a lot of ceremonies at the time of the Buddha, if you're not skillful at it, at cutting this kusa grass, you're going to slice your hand because it's basically razor sharp. So yeah, kusa is the grass, and la is a suffix that means to cut. So basically it's cutting of the kusa grass. You have to be skillful. You have to have a measure of dexterity when dealing with the kusa grass. And similarly with the mind, you have to be able to use the sword of wisdom appropriately, because there's ways that you can use the sword of intellect in ways which will hurt yourself and others. And then we come to the line which was the focus of the meditation, sachitta pariyodapanang, to purify one's own mind. That's what we're here for. So continuing that. Then the final line, etam buddhana sasanam. So something which is interesting here is the plural of all the Buddhas. So most Westerners, myself included, didn't come to Buddhism with any kind of well, we came with our own strange ideas about the world and the history of the world. But the Buddha does use the plural here. So all Buddhas, this is the teaching of all Buddhas. And I think that's quite fascinating. From a Mahayana context, it's not at all surprising. You've got all sorts of Buddhas. You've got within a dust mote, this is a word which you see translated in Mahayana suttas. I didn't know, M-O-T-E, a dust mote. It's basically like when you see dust, if you've got light shining into a room, one of these little things that's floating around, that's a dust mote. And in these different Mahayana sutras, they'll say that within even a single little dust mote, you'll have, trillions of, or infinite, Buddha lands, with infinite Buddhas residing there. So there are lots of Buddhas in Mahayana context, but not so many in a Theravada context, but not just one, which is interesting. You might have go into that more in a different talk, but something you'll notice is that the Buddha is being quite dualistic in this. There's what's wholesome or what's papa, and what's wholesome or skillful, what's kusala. And you do see places in the Dhammapada, a lot in the Sutta Nipata, where the Buddha does speak from a non-dual perspective, or talk about from the perspective of an arhat. An arhat is someone who has abandoned all good and all papa, all unwholesome, all bad. So the fact that the Buddha is still teaching preaching to the arhats who are listening to Ovāda-Pāṭimokkha, this dualistic teaching, I think that's quite significant. I hadn't really thought about that before, but yeah, you have Buddhist sages throughout the history of Buddhism, definitely in Tibetan Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, Mahayana, Vajrayana, who are very much teaching in a non-dualistic way. And that's great when it's great from the level of wisdom, non-duality, or from a level of concentration even. Non-dual teachings can be quite useful and true, but from a level of precepts, a level of morality, it's quite skillful, it's quite useful to acknowledge that there are actions and habits, there are good habits and bad habits. And eventually, an arhat, somebody who's on the arhat path, will give up habits, good and bad, at least the mental aspect of that. But the Buddha is, in a way, you could read it as the Buddha encouraging the arhats who are there, don't just go non-dual on everybody. Tell people all you have to do is watch the mind, and don't worry about good or evil, because they're both ephemeral. They're all dreams, good and bad. It's all the same. It's all delusion. So something to consider. We get to the next verse, which is Kanti paramang tapo titika Nibbānang paramang vadanti Buddha nahi pabbajito parupagati nasamano hoti parang viheta yanto. Patient endurance is the highest practice, burning out defilements. The Buddha say Nibbāna is supreme. Not a renunciate is one who injures others. Whoever troubles others can't be called a spiritual seeker. So the first line, Kanti paramang tapo titika. So we actually have two words for patience here. The first is Kanti, and the second one is titika. The first one, Kanti, I've mentioned it in some other context recently, that Kanti, it usually means patient, but it can also mean forgiveness. So this line could very well be translated patience, or of course patience, but forgiveness is the highest practice, burning out defilements, which is very skillful means, especially when the fires of anger or righteousness are burning us up from within. So remembering forgiveness. The word tapa is what's translated here as burning out defilements. So the ascetics at the time of the Buddha believed in this idea of tapas, and they were called tapin, which are basically people who tapa, the verb root tup is to burn, and a tapin is someone who burns away. What are they burning away? Theoretically, through austere practices, they're burning away defilements. And that was the belief that just by extreme fasting, extreme sleep, extreme pointing up in the air all the time, or squatting, or all these other practices, having really long dreadlocks, never taking a bath, this type of stuff, that the belief was that just by doing these outward signs, you're burning off defilements, where the Buddha redefines it that no, the highest tapa, the highest spiritual practice is patience, is forgiveness. So the Buddhas, again, plural, say that Nibbāna is supreme. The Nibbāna, the complete end of greed, anger, and delusion, the highest happiness, the highest bliss, the highest peace. Not a renunciate is one who injures others, or troubling others, one is not a samana. So, yeah, you don't just have to be a monk to benefit from this. The Buddha is pointing to, once you enter into a Buddhist path that has a clear sense of the importance of renunciation, like a Theravada Buddhist path definitely does, and hopefully monks should be exemplars of. When you have this ideal of renunciation, you're giving up a lot of sensual pleasures. You're maybe eating less, you're maybe maybe sleeping less, you're buying less. Um, and what can happen, it's like when people in AA, like when alcoholics stop drinking, they might start smoking cigarettes. And then they go to NA and stop smoking cigarettes. And then they might go to OA, Overeaters Anonymous. It's like the compulsion, the compulsive tendency just shifts over. And similarly, when you start renouncing things in the world, sensual pleasures, oftentimes you don't get angry at other people. You don't dispute with others because of sensuality. Like, you took my stuff. I wanted that beautiful thing. You took it. You got the girl. You got the boy. That was mine, whatever. You start fighting over views. So I think the Buddha is really highlighting, yeah, you think you're being righteous and good with whatever kind of view you have. I'm right. That's what it says in the Pali Canon, or I'm right. That's what scientists say, or that's what the news says, or whatever. It's the truth. You know, but if you injure other people based on that view, or if you trouble others, then you're not really living up to this spiritual ideal that all of us have. And then the final verse, a lot of practical advice. Again, interesting to consider in the context of a teaching to arhats who have no greed, anger, and delusion. But anupavado, anupagato, patimokkha cha sangvaro, matanyuta cha bhattasming, pantancha sayanasanang, adichite cha ayogo, etam buddhanasasanang. Not to insult and not to injure, to live restrained by training rules, knowing one's measure at the meal, retreating to a lonely place, devotion to the higher mind. These are the teachings of all Buddhas. So again, the first two words, anupavado, anupagato, pointing again to how, there's not really a place for righteous indignation in the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha once said, if a bandit was to capture you and saw you apart limb by limb, like they're like sawing through your arm and then your other arm and then like your leg, if you were to give rise to a single thought of anger, then you could not call yourself a disciple of his. That's a high bar. That's a high bar. But that points to what the principle here of, when I feel righteous, that sense of rightness is, even though I might be right, it's not righteous in a Buddhist context. So to live restrained by the Pāṭimokkha. So the Pāṭimokkha is the rules for monks, as I mentioned, the 227 rules. But it didn't come about. The Buddha didn't just get enlightened, and then the next day he says, okay, there was nobody there. First of all, when he first became enlightened under the Bodhi tree, he had to go find his brother monks about a month away, or several weeks walk away. And then when he finds them, it's not like his first teaching was, okay, I'm going to teach you all 227 of these rules. Basically, all of the monks' rules just came about over time when shameless and bad monks started doing weird and bad stuff, having sex or stealing. The Buddha would lay down a rule and say, that's not what you should do. So when these monks were meeting, just within the first year after he attained enlightenment, there wouldn't have been 227 rules of the Pāṭimokkha yet. So it must mean something else here. So being restrained by a higher sense of morality is how you might be able to take it. Then knowing one's measure at the meal, it's a great teaching. I remember as a young monk, I always used to, I did at that time, and I still do believe that there are arhats in the world, people who have put an end to greed, anger, and delusion. And I do believe I've met them. And I used to always, before I had met anyone who I thought had met that qualification, I was always fantasizing, like, I would love to watch an arhat eat. Like, what would that look like? What, just how could someone not, not be going towards sensuality while eating food? And then, I have, probably shamelessly, when I've been in the room where I'm with people who I, might have some level of attainment, I've rather shamelessly, kind of peeked and seen how they're eating, and actually didn't look that different from, probably looked different from some of us, myself included. But at any rate, even for arhats, this idea of knowing the measure, the mata is the measure, and anyu, matanyu, knowing the measure of food. not too much, not too little. And it changes for everybody. But the Buddha didn't say, okay, half a bowl that's the size of your skull. He said, just know the measure. And it's something you have to figure out for yourself. What is that? Retreating to a lonely place, another fascinating point in here. Wouldn't the Buddha want his arhat disciples to go out and teach and evangelize? I mean, in fact, he did. After he taught a group of 60 people, friends of Yasa, who all attained arhatship, he told them all, go out for the goodness and the happiness of all living beings, and don't go any two of you in the same direction. So there is at least some instance of the Buddha saying to arhats, go out and teach. But here he's saying, arhats retreating to a lonely place is the teachings of the Buddhas. And why would that be? I think it's because it's inspiring for those of us who are inspired by meditation, by the prospects and the possibilities, the real possibilities of meditation, of calm, of seclusion, of stepping back. Having someone who's inspiring actually doing that, even if they have no reason to, or else have no reason to be in seclusion. They would be the same. It's there's a Dhammapada verse number 98 where the Buddha says, whether it's in a city or it's in a village or it's in a forest or a jungle, wherever the arhats dwell, that's a wonderful place. And then verse 99, that's a place where most people can't delight, which is true. Most of us are like addicted to iPhones or whatever. But in the places where most people can't delight, the arhats find delight. So it's just some place to go for rejuvenation. Mahakassapa, in his verses in the Therigatha, mentions it's the first nature poetry, I believe, that really exists in a large context. And he just has this peon verse after verse of just saying, these rocky crags refresh me, talking about how wonderful it is to live in the forest. And this is an arhat at the time of the Buddha. So in devotion to the higher mind. And that's what all of us should be doing all of the time. The adhicitta, the higher mind. Adhicitte cha ayogo. Ayoga, just like the word yoga. Yoga is you get into a posture and then you hold that. You then synchronize the breath with the posture. Similarly, this is a yoking of the mind to a meditation object or a meditation subject, like awareness in the heart. So that's it can be translated as devotion, but it can also be translated as a thorough yoking of the higher heart, or a thorough rigor in relationship to the higher heart, higher mind. So yeah, open things up for, I hope that was helpful, and open things up for questions. So all right, good to see people here. One friend has COVID. Sorry to hear that. Hope they get better soon. All right, Ajahn Nisabo is here. He's on retreat, and it's great. Ajahn, thanks for taking the time to come out of retreat. I hope it didn't shake you too much. And this is an example of a practitioner, yet pantancha sayanasanam, dwelling in a secluded place. And it's inspiring. That's why these Western monasteries continue the practice of having this winter retreat. Some people might say it's selfish, but yeah, I loved serving the winter retreat. It's an honor to be able to support people who are, giving themselves to meditation, to really trying to hunker down into the practice. So, or open up into the practice, depending. Okay. So we have Shelley here saying, Ajahn Pasno, Ajahn Menindu, and Ajahn Sudanto teaching on the Ovāda-Pāṭimokkha this week. Awesome. Yeah, I listened to one by Ajahn Jayasaro this morning. So we have, Ajahn Nisabo, I'm not sure who he's responding to, but the word kantar as an agent of kanti, possessed of meekness and gentleness, said of an elephant. Interesting. Good find, Ajahn. Yeah, I hadn't. Great find. Yeah, I hadn't seen that before. Okay. So I lost my smell and taste from COVID 3 years ago, and the sensuality of food is gone. It doesn't bother me to not taste food. Wow. So 3 years ago, I would say congratulations and mudita. But I once said that to someone who had lost their sense of taste based on an illness, and they were just totally taken aback and offended by my comment. So I definitely don't mean it that way. I hope it's led to some level of ease and isn't at all stressful. So, but if you're not bothered by food, I hope it sounds like could be a good thing. So, but I definitely wouldn't wish that on people who don't want it wished upon them. So, and the follow up. But I really miss the sensuality of smell, like the smell of flowers of the ocean. Yeah. This is a good point. Yeah. So, Ajahn Nisabo, why do you feel giving up evil comes before undertaking the good? Interesting question. I mean, that's generally how the Buddha's teachings go. I mean, you've got the 5 precepts, which are phrased in the negative. I undertake the precept to refrain from X, Y, Z, killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct. And when you are able to stop using your time on these things which are counterproductive or at their least, just time wasters, then things open up. Time opens up. The time that you would have spent killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconducting, all this type of stuff, or just wasting your time in other ways. If you stop doing that, then there's an opening, and the heart. After a while, there can be a period of, withdrawal. But after that, things feel lighter, and there's more space for the good and more appreciation of the good. The Buddhist path is one of joy, getting better and better at joy. So we don't give things up. We don't give up evil because we hate it, or we hate people, or we hate ourselves. We give it up because it's counterproductive. It doesn't lead to happiness. So thanks for the question. What is the difference between Buddhas and Arhats? Good question. So Buddhas, well, in a Theravada context, Buddhas and Arhats, the Buddha said, have the same awakening. And you even find, so both of them, both Arhats and Buddhas, have no greed, no anger, no delusion in terms of the Four Noble Truths. They are never confused about suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path. So they have the same awakening, and sometimes Arhats are even called Buddha or Buddho, Buddha in the Pali discourses. But it's said that the Buddha just did his purification, didn't decide to attain full enlightenment for a lot longer. He intentionally was cultivating all these other parami, spiritual perfections, which one doesn't need to perfectly fulfill to attain arhatship. So like perfect teaching, you had arhats, like Revata was foremost at living in the forest. And it said, you read it in the canon, and, it might sound weird to talk about an arhat as being shy, because, and a shy arhat would have no, there's nothing painful about an arhat shyness. It's just didn't like to talk to people as much. So whereas the Buddha had complete skill, had practiced this for multiple lifetimes. So it's a difference in quantity from a Theravada context of having practiced versus quality. The awakening is qualitatively the same, but the quantity of practice that led up to that and the quantity of affiliated skill sets is much more broad in the case of a Buddha. So, Ajahn, can you say more about arhants giving up even good habits? Is this because habits take effort and an arhant's good behavior has now become natural? Um, that is, the second part is definitely the case. You talk about the pakata sila. Pakata, or the Thai bokade, is just normal or natural. It's a word that you see come up definitely in the Visuddhimagga, but arhats have natural virtue. They don't have to, there are no urges to kill, no urges to steal, no urges to uh, have sex at all, any kind of sex, no urge to lie. So that's definitely part of it. And in terms of habits taking effort, I think I may have not qualified my statement earlier when I said that arhants have no habits. What I didn't mean there is habit in the sense of like waking up every morning at a certain time. Like the people who I believe are extremely good practitioners, yeah, they have great habits, very healthy habits of eating, healthy habits of um, wakefulness, sleeping. It's not like they can't do anything, but no longer have habits in the sense of maybe a Buddhist sense of that word, like an inclination. That's a good word. So they don't have um, biased inclinations. They have this natural inclination towards sila, but they don't have biased leaning ins, inclinings towards certainly not any kind of rites and rituals. So they've gotten rid of that at stream entry. But yeah, giving up, they no longer need to outflow. They no longer can outflow. That's the definition of an arhat. And that's in some way, the way that most of us do habits is a way of outflowing, whether it's a good habit or a bad habit, we're just like seeking outward in certain ways. So hopefully that was helpful. And we can continue talking about that in the Zoom rest session if we like. So earlier, as not doing evil included not thinking bad thoughts, pointing to the Eightfold Path. Great point. Yep, definitely. Is the solution to just stop thinking bad thoughts? What did the Buddha have in mind? The practice of seeing thoughts like clouds, Mingyur Rinpoche, has felt lighter and led to gentle progress. Absolutely. At the beginning of this evening, I led a guided meditation about bringing the mind into a heart space. And that's partially inspired by teachings similar to those that Mingyur Rinpoche gives. For people who don't know, Mingyur Rinpoche is a Tibetan monk who practices Dzogchen and is currently teaching a retreat and having conversations with Bhante and Nalio through Wisdom publications. So you can go on the Wisdom publications website and listen to their conversations, which are fascinating because Bhante Nalio knows the Theravada, the Pali Canon so well, and he's able to sympathize with Mingyur Rinpoche's, this Dzogchen mind-only, non-dual teachings in a really beautiful and fascinating way. So yeah, if one can stop thoughts in a healthy way, which is hard to do, then inclining in that direction, certainly not forcing in that direction, if that's unhealthy. But yeah, just watching the clouds go by. Similarly, just when you brought the mind into the heart space, then yeah, thoughts come up and thoughts pass away, and they don't have to be a problem. The mind can be broad enough that when you notice that the mind is going up to thoughts, the answer when your object is spaciousness from the heart, the answer is not, okay, grab the thought, grab the mind back from latching onto the thoughts and pull it back down to the heart. The answer is just to let go. Thoughts had come by and I got fascinated with them and just let go. And then the mind is broad again. So good questions, everybody. And now is time for, we can switch over to our Zoom session. So I'll put that link in the chat. And this is opportunity for us to just have a more two-way conversation. So you can just go to that link and look forward to seeing people there. And Ajahn Nisabo, who is delighting in an empty hut as we speak, will be still coming for the whole of his 3-month winter retreat. I believe he's a month in now. He'll be teaching at St. Mark's as usual. And then I'll be back next week for another Wednesday evening. So I wish everybody well, and it's really heartening. What a beautiful community we've got here. So, Anumodana, everyone.